We're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 19 here this morning. 1 Kings chapter 19. Sure to appreciate our musicians here this morning and others who couldn't make it as well. Always appreciate those who serve. And, you know, on a morning like this, you really kind of grasp a little bit more what it takes to make everything happen on a Sunday morning. And we certainly do appreciate all of the servants. I want to remind you of next week, next Sunday. And because of the weather, we've really not been able to push and promote as we'd like to have. However, we're still on for next Sunday. And you say, well, what is next Sunday? Well, it's our launch of our new Edify groups, and we're really excited about this. And so you'll hopefully, Lord willing, get a letter here the first part of this week that will explain some of this in detail. But next Sunday morning at 10 a.m., it'll look a little bit different than what it has in the past. In fact, we'll have new groups for our young adults, our married couples outside of graduation into that 40-year-old mark, as well as our single adults, both those meeting down at the Timothy Center, and then for our couples and singles as well, ages 40 to 60, down at the coffee house in the fellowship hall there. And then we'll have our 60 and older Golden Ager crowd here in the auditorium, and then our ladies class as well will continue to meet as they normally do. I am excited about these upcoming weeks and days as the Lord continues to grow our church. It's important that we not lose each other in a crowd. And so it's going to be important for you. I really do want to challenge you. If you're not accustomed to coming at 10 o'clock, this is a great time to just jump in there and start coming and find a group of people that you can connect with. And, you know, part of the allure, but it's not a healthy allure, but part of the allure of a large church is that we can slip in and slip out without being noticed. But that really isn't the point of being in church at all. The point is so that we can have connection and that we can have support for one another. And so that's really what the expanding of the Edify groups are all about. And I want to encourage you again to get in one and be a part of it the best that you can. This morning, we're continuing in our series on winter blues. And it seems to me that this time of year, at least for me, things are a little bit more gloomy. Christmas is over. The new year starts, and that's exciting, but you get short days and gloomy days at that. And sometimes we're not blessed with at least the snow, but we're only blessed with muddy conditions and dreary conditions, and that certainly affects a lot of it either as well. We certainly get our credit card bill from our Christmas spending, and we wonder why we didn't follow Dave Ramsey's advice in December. And so that can get us down as well. And there's a multitude of other reasons why we might be a little bit down this time of year. And so I wanted to look at, last week we looked at Psalm 42, and we looked at the very fact that David talked to himself. He said, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul? Why are you disquieted within me? What's wrong with you?" Is basically what he was saying. He said, "Hope thou in God." This week I want to take just a few moments, and this will be kind of a part one, part two, as I didn't feel like that I could really give it all to you at once. But we're going to look at 1 Kings in chapter 19, and we're going to look at the life of Elijah. Elijah is a very interesting story to follow in your Bible. In fact, if you were asked the first thing that you think of when you think of Elijah, maybe it would be Mount Carmel, as he stood against 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. Perhaps it's when he prayed for no rain, and there would be no rain for 3.5 years, and then he prayed once again, and God opened up the heavens so it would rain. Perhaps when you think of Elijah, it would be that he stood in the face of King Ahab and told him that it was him and his family that had displeased God and dishonored the nation. Would it be when Elijah miraculously brought back to life the boy whose mother had sent for him? At the end of his time here on earth, he was taken up in a chariot of fire. And we think about Elijah as a strong man who accomplished great things. And really, God used him to accomplish great and mighty things. But in 1 Kings chapter 19, we find a different Elijah. In fact, this is not the Elijah. It's not the same man, it would seem like anyway. It's not the same man who just a chapter before stood against 450 prophets, 850 total, mocking them and poking and teasing at them. It's not the same guy. We find Elijah in a deep state of depression, wishing himself to die. Then in James chapter 5, we find this encouragement, and I find it to be encouraging when James says, Elias was a man subject to like passions as we are. And he prayed earnestly that it might not rain, and it rained not as on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. Now, we may look at that and focus on the latter end of that verse, but I focus in on the first part of that verse when he says that Elijah was a man that was subject to like passions as we are. And so Elijah, for all the strengths that he had and all the ups that he had and all the great victories that he had, we find him subject to like passions as we are, even here in 1 Kings chapter 19. Depression is a condition in which a person feels discouraged, sad, hopeless, unmotivated, or disinterested in life in general. It affects over 18 million adults in any given year. It's the leading cause of disability for ages 15 to 44. It's the primary reason why someone dies of suicide about every 12 minutes. 40,000 people a year. To put that in comparison, we average about 16,000 lives each year that's lost from homicide. Elijah actually had good reason to be down here in chapter 19. See, Elijah had suffered a nationwide rejection in the reign of King Ahab, who the Bible says did more to provoke the Lord to anger than any of the other kings. Elijah had prayed for no rain. A severe drought we find in chapter number 18. If you'll look there with me, in chapter number 18, the very beginning here, and it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go, show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. And Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab, and there was a sore famine in Samaria. So the lack of rain for the last 3.5 years had caused famine in the land. And we can be all for our principles and we can stand up for what we believe is right. But when it starts affecting food on the table, all of a sudden, who we thought our candidate was really doesn't matter anymore. Would you agree with that? In fact, I believe, and I'm not political normally, but I believe that affected the last election cycle, is there were many people who saw their personal lives being affected by inflation and things of that nature, and they said, you know what? we're going on in a different direction than maybe what we did before. And so here we are. There's famine in the land, and guess who prayed for no rain? Now, the blame should have been put on Ahab. In fact, when Elijah goes to Ahab, and Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said unto him, Art thou he that troubleth Israel? Ahab had not only personally placed the blame on Elijah for the famine in the land and for the fact that they had had no rain in 3.5 years, it was a severe drought, but he had also taken the heart of the nation and pointed it to Elijah and said, this is the guy who prayed for no rain. This is the guy that you ought to blame. And so there's a severe drought, and the nation is in a famine, and the wicked king Ahab had sent people to look for Elijah to the point that he had to go in hiding. So Elijah finds himself in chapter 19 in despair, in depression, but it was because of the pressure that he felt from the king and the entire nation that this whole thing is my fault. All the people knew he was sought after, not in a good way. He was hated. He was isolated. He was lonely. And it goes to show us that sometimes, even in the complete obedience of God, us doing exactly what God wants us to do, it can leave us in a place where others don't think very kindly toward us. Elijah was just obeying the Lord. He prayed because God told him to. There was no rain because God stopped the rain. All eyes are not on Ahab for his disobedience. All eyes are on Elijah for his obedience. So he was hated. Secondly, Elijah was exhausted. If you back up to chapter number 18 and see the account that leads into chapter 19, we find that Elijah had a lot of things going on. He was physically exhausted. We find in chapter 18 that there was a dramatic contest with the prophets of Baal and Asherah. All 850 prophets of Baal were taken care of by the wicked king Ahab and his wicked wife Jezebel. And here in chapter 18, we find this unfold where Elijah goes to Ahab and he talks with Ahab, and then Ahab and Elijah, when Ahab saw Elijah, he says, hey, are you the one that's troubling Israel? And listen to Elijah's response, such boldness. He answered and he said this, I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, in that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Balaam. So we see Elijah being very bold. Verse 21, Elijah came to all the people and said, how long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Elijah said to the people, even I only, remain a prophet of the Lord. But Baal's prophets are 450 men. And so he calls for a contest there on Mount Carmel. Just for sake of context, let's look at it. Chapter 18, and look in verse number 23. He said, let them therefore give us 2 bullocks, and let them choose 1 bullock for themselves, and cut it in pieces, and lay it on wood, and put no fire under it. And I will dress the other bullock. I will dress the other bullock, and lay it on the wood, and put no fire under. And call ye on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God that answereth by fire, let him be God. And all the people answered and said, it is well spoken. Now, I understand that culturally this would have been more accepted. I have a weird brain, and I'm thinking, like, if I went to Charleston and was like, hey, here's what we're going to do. Let's have a contest. You get all your leaders and all of your, and you do, and we're going to set up this big altar. And I can't imagine everyone around me going, you know what? That's a good idea right there. Let's do it that way. Yeah. But culturally, this would have been something that they obviously, it wasn't too out of the box and too weird for them, and they said, okay, it's well spoken. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose you one bullock for yourself and dress it first, for ye are many, and call on the name of your gods, but put no fire under. They took the bullock which was given them, and they dressed it and called on the name of Baal from morning even until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, nor any that answered. And they leaped upon the altar which was made. It came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, cry aloud, for he is a God. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or maybe he's in a journey, maybe he's taking a nap, and you got to cry aloud so you can wake him up. I mean, he's kind of poking the bear a little bit. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their manner with the knives and lancets till the blood gushed out upon them. And it came to pass when midday was past, and they prophesied until the time of offering of the evening sacrifice, and there was neither voice that answer, nor any regarded. And Elijah said unto the people, come near unto me. And all the people came near unto him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the 12 tribes of the sons of Jacob, unto whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be thy name. Now, I want us to look at this, verse number 33. And he put the wood in order, and cut the bullocks in pieces, and laid him on the wood, and said, fill four barrels of water. And he has them do this 3 times. It's a great miracle that takes place here that proves and shows the power of God, and we could really park there. But I want you to see, even in the adrenaline of the moment, the physical effort that Elijah put forth to make this happen. He repaired the altar. He got all the wood and placed it under it. He dressed the bullock and prepared it for the sacrifice. Could I just mention this? Any of you who have ever dressed out a deer, much less a cow, personally, like one person, you know that's no small feat. And so at the end of this contest, we read on, and I love verse number 38. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice after he had put 12 barrels of water, by the way, in the middle of a drought. What kind of faith would that take, is to go get water in the middle of a drought and pour it on the altar. And if you've ever tried to start a fire, your wood really can't be wet and that work out too well. And so they knew it was a miracle when the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the sacrifice and the wood and the stones and the dust, and watch this, and licked up the water that was in the trench. I think that Elijah must have been from West Virginia or something. He licked up all the water that was in the trench. And anybody's day after that would have been like, ooh, wow, adrenaline rush. I'm tired, but I'm still going, right? I just dressed a bull. I just built an altar. I just put all the wood under it. I just witnessed this great work of the Lord. I've been out here mocking the other prophets all day, and there's this pressure, and all of this is on me. But finally, it's over. But it wasn't over. Verse number 40, and Elijah said unto them, take the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they took them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slew them there. How many prophets were there? Do you remember? Baal had 450. Asherah had another 400, 850 prophets. And not Elijah single-handedly, but the people took these false prophets and they took them down by the brook and they killed them. That's what the Bible says. And they did all of that in a day's time. So we get into chapter 19. You stick with me for a couple minutes here. He's physically and emotionally exhausted. Immediately, we turn to the end of chapter 18, where he took his servant and climbed to the top of Mount Carmel so they could see over the Mediterranean Sea. And there had been no rain for the last 3.5 years, and he prays for rain with his head between his knees, fervently crying out to God. 6 times he sends his servant to look, and there's no rain. But on the 7th, the servant reported a cloud as small as a man's hand rising from the sea. Now he returns all the way to the city of Jezreel, not a small distance, up to 17 miles. This is a jam-packed few days for Elijah here. 17 miles back to Jezreel. He expected a warm welcome. He had just prayed, and the rain was coming after 3.5 years, but he received criticism instead and a death threat from the king's wife, whose prophet's death he was responsible for. And that threat was to be carried out within the next 24 hours. Jezebel sent a messenger into Elijah, chapter 19 of verse 2. So let the gods do to me and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. So Elijah goes in to hiding. I would say not only was he emotionally and physically exhausted, not only was the pressure of the entire nation hating him that weighed down on him, but after this huge victory, we find that he's lost his sense of divine direction. God never ordered him to hide from Jezebel. I believe probably if he would have just stood up at that moment, God would have delivered him from Jezebel. But he runs and hides, and he goes away and flees for his life. He didn't have to fear her. He had just seen God defeat 850 prophets. She was no match. But it's proof that when we lose our sense of divine direction, we lean heavily on the praise of man. Or I could say it this way, the fear of man. Proverbs says the fear of man brings a what? A snare, a trap. We look to man for affirmation. We look to man for all the things that God supplies in our life. But Elijah was too weary to even sense the affirmation of God. I would say, fourthly, that Elijah had lost his faith in other people. When you feel you can't trust anyone, not even a close friend, not even a spouse, not even your pastor, you're heading into a reckless direction. Elijah was full of anger. Most that study the subject of depression would agree that built-up anger displays and has a significant role. Anger. It's very evident that Elijah was in a deep state of depression. But listen, today we see him wishing to die under a tree. But just pause for a moment. We have the ability to read on. You and I have the ability to read about Elijah's life chapter 18 and all of chapter 19. And sometimes we read over that and we have to go back to James 1. Elijah was just a man like you and me, subject to like passions. And understand that in Elijah's heart and in Elijah's mind, he had never read the rest of 1 Kings 19. In Elijah's heart and Elijah's mind, he didn't know how this was going to turn out. At that point in his life, he was emotionally and physically exhausted. At that moment in his life, he felt hated, he felt resented, he felt betrayed, he felt alone. And he finds himself drained under a tree with thoughts of wanting to die. Can I tell you something? I've met a lot of people who probably wouldn't say, I have suicidal thoughts. But I've met plenty of people who in their mind felt like this world would be a better place if they just weren't here. There's a difference between those two, by the way. I'd love to be able to spend the afternoon and unpack all of this, but I want to give you the first few things that God used in Elijah's life to restore him, because as we know, he didn't die. By the way, still today, he's not dead. Isn't it ironic, the very man who just sitting under a tree going, I wish that I could just die, God said, well, not only am I not going to do that now, but it's going to be a really, really, really long time before anything like that happens. I want to encourage you with something this morning. This isn't how it ends. God has a different ending for your life. There's the rest of chapter 19 for you and me that we don't know about yet. I want you to see a couple things here. Verse number 3 of chapter 19. Follow along with me, will you? And when he saw that, he arose. When he saw that the death threat on his life from a very powerful and wicked woman, he arose and went for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. This is kind of important here, and we'll probably come back to it, but there's a sense of isolation there. Do you see that? I just want to be alone. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat under the juniper tree and requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baken upon the coals, and a cruse of oil at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again. The angel of the Lord came again the second time, and touched him, and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God. There's three areas that I want to give to you that may not seem like a big deal, but I'm telling you, here later in the chapter, God is going to deal with Elijah's heart. He's going to deal with him on a spiritual level. But before he could do that, there were some physical things that Elijah needed. Number one, God used rest. Now, I'm not going to be your Google search here this morning, but just go home and figure out, just Google the benefits of sleep. An average sleep needed for adults is said to be 7.5 to 8 hours. I saw a friend that has been going through a struggle with his wife, actually just lost his wife recently. Said, I got a solid 6 hours of sleep without interruption. Don't ever underestimate the power of a good night's rest. The average person gets about 6.5 hours on weekdays and 7.5 hours on weekends. The average sleep needed for teens, how about this? The average sleep needed for teens is 8 to 10 hours a day versus our 7.5 hours. We see this so much with children. When we first started the church, I wanted, we had a Sunday morning service, we had a meal, and then we had a Sunday afternoon service, and I wanted so badly for that Sunday afternoon service to kind of be a family type service. We didn't have necessarily children's ministry. It was just going to be a family sitting in church together, and the sermons were going to kind of be pointed in that direction, and we would eat, and everything's good, and all the young families would just start bolting out the door, and I thought, what in the world is going on? And you know what? Almost all of them said they got to lay down for a nap. Now, we know when a kid is fussy, when a baby's fussy, what's almost the common answer that we hear? They need a nap. They didn't get a nap today. They're just sleepy. And we say that about kids all the time. I want Holly to start just explaining my behavior that way to others. I'm ticked off at the guy who just cut me off, and she's like, he just didn't sleep well that last night. I want that kind of explanation because, hey, by the way, it's real. We think there's some kind of like toughness about going on little sleep. And you can do that for a while, but that can't be life. You have to get in a healthy regimen of sleep. God used rest. The second thing that he used is food. Like good food, like healthy food. Now, here's the thing. When we feel depressed, when we feel down, we want to go to comfort food. We want to go to the things that gives us an instant dopamine reaction of, yes, that little Debbie cake or whatever your comfort food is felt good, but that's not necessarily what we need. When those things are happening and we're going through seasons of life, we need good sleep, but we need good food. We need healthy food. We need nutrition in our body. If our body is depleted of something, we need to make sure that we're giving God designed us this way. Good food, good hydration. And the third thing God uses is exercise. I want to say this. Before God addressed the spiritual, he dealt with the physical. I read something the other day, and I think it's true. I adapted it just a little bit. Basically, the statement went like this. If you feel like you hate everyone, eat something. If you feel like everyone hates you, get some sleep. If you feel like you hate yourself, take a walk. I think there's some truth in that. There's some spiritual truth in that. If you feel like you hate everybody, hunger is a real thing, right? Eat something. If you feel like everybody hates you, maybe you need a good nap. If you feel like you hate yourself, take a walk. it was late the other night, and everybody was kind of on edge. Everybody's been cooped up in the house. I don't know about you, but I don't do cooped up very well. I didn't handle COVID well. I've not handled this, this well. And so if I feel like I can't be mobile, nothing makes me want to go somewhere like somebody's saying you can't go anywhere, And so maybe it's just rebellion. Anyway, everybody was kind of cooped up in the house, and I said something to Cameron, and she just, and it was so out of character for her, really, but she kind of snapped. And I immediately, as a loving father, handled that horribly. Like I could have just intercepted that and put out that fire, but instead I just threw gasoline on it. And I just snapped right back, and it went from 0 to 10 in less than 10 seconds. And I said, I just need a minute. I walked out of the room, and I went in our little office. I sit down in the chair. Cameron comes up to me, and she said, now this is, a 9-year-old has more spiritual maturity than I do at this point in life. She just walked up to me and she went, I'm going to bed. And she left. I said, good night, honey. I love you. When she left, she had left this little note sitting beside me. And so I got the note, I opened it up, and she had written out, Dad, I think I'm just tired. I'm sorry. I don't like it when you get frustrated. I'll talk to you in the morning. Number one, I felt like such a jerk. Like my kid is the one who's reconciling the situation and not me. But she had something there. Dad, I think I'm just tired. I think the reason I'm behaving this way, the reason I feel this way, the reason my emotions are all over the place is I'm just exhausted. God uses proper rest, proper food, proper exercise, proper hydration to minister to our physical needs so he can get to the heart. Next week, we're going to finish this out. It's really awesome how God starts asking questions to Elijah to get him to open up and understand things about himself that he never realized. But I want to give you this verse. Words of Jesus. He says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest for your souls. The truth of the matter is, not everyone hates you, and you don't hate everyone. And you're not supposed to hate yourself because you're created in his image. You're an image bearer of God. He don't make junk. He don't make mistakes. And so there's obviously something in you that when God, before the foundation of the world, when he looked forward, looked at you and said, you know what, that's a person that I can use in a specific capacity. So God's got a plan. You may not be aware of it yet. You may not have it figured out yet. But God does have a plan. You may not know the end of your chapter 19 yet, but God does, and he's got a plan. There's times in life where we can look back and go, wow, didn't see that coming. Wow. But God had a plan through it all. And Jesus, his invitation is, you can come to me, and the condition is not on your mental state or your strength. He actually says, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, you can come to me. And he doesn't say all the problems go away, but God has a way of renewing our mind and our body to be able to see life in a totally different way. One of my favorite authors is Mark Batterson. He says this, a change in place and a change in pace equals a change in perspective. Is that not the truth? Sometimes we need a change in place and a change in pace to gain a fresh perspective on what God is doing in our life. Let's bow our heads for just a moment here this morning.